Before we begin, take a moment to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the stories coming next. Here, we share powerful human journeys about unexpected turns, quiet resilience, and lives changed in ways no one sees coming. If this kind of story speaks to you, make sure to explore the other videos on the channel and share this one with someone who might need it. Now, let's begin. Rachel Morgan's alarm rang at 4:45 a.m., the same flat, electronic sound that had pulled her out of sleep every weekday for years. She silenced it before it could ring a second time, not because she wanted to spare herself the noise, but because she didn't want to wake the children too early. The apartment was small, and sound traveled easily through thin walls that had heard too many arguments, too many late-night worries, too many whispered reassurances spoken into the dark. She lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling, letting the weight of the coming day settle on her chest. Her body already felt tired, as if it remembered what was ahead before her mind fully caught up. 44 years old, she thought, and it felt older than that most mornings. Not old in years, but in accumulation. Accumulation of responsibilities, of unfinished rest, of days that blurred together into one long stretch of effort without pause. Rachel pushed herself upright and swung her feet onto the floor. The cold startled her into full wakefulness. She stood, stretched her back carefully, and winced at the familiar tightness along her shoulders. There was no time to dwell on it. There was never time. She moved quietly into the narrow kitchen, careful not to let the cabinet doors creak as she reached for the coffee grounds. The coffee maker was old, a hand-me-down from a friend who had upgraded years ago, but it still worked, and that was enough. As the coffee brewed, she glanced at the calendar taped crookedly to the refrigerator. Library shift until 3, delivery shift starting at 5. Somewhere in between, she would need to pick up groceries, review her son's school paperwork, help her daughter with a science project that was already overdue, and figure out how to stretch what remained in her checking account until the end of the month. She didn't calculate the numbers anymore unless she absolutely had to. Doing so too often only sharpened the anxiety without changing the outcome. She poured coffee into a travel mug and leaned against the counter, letting the heat seep into her hands. The apartment was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. In the living room, the couch doubled as a bed for her teenage son, Ethan. His school backpack sat on the floor beside it, unzipped, papers spilling out. Down the short hallway, her daughter Lily slept in the bedroom they shared, curled beneath a blanket decorated with stars that had faded with too many washes. Rachel watched the hallway for a moment, listening for any sign of movement. Nothing. They would wake soon enough. She allowed herself one quiet minute, standing there with her coffee, before the day demanded her attention again. By 6, the apartment was awake. Ethan emerged first, hair uncombed, eyes half open, already scrolling through his phone. Lily followed soon after, still groggy, dragging her feet as she headed for the bathroom. Rachel moved between them, reminding one to eat, the other to hurry, mentally ticking off tasks as if checking items off an invisible list. She packed lunches with practiced efficiency, kissed the tops of their heads, and listened with half an ear as Ethan complained about an upcoming test and Lily worried aloud about her project. She wanted to sit with them longer, to ask more questions, to be fully present. But the clock on the microwave blinked insistently, and the bus schedule did not care about good intentions. At 7:10, they were out the door, backpacks slung over shoulders, Lily turning back at the last moment to wave. Rachel waved back, smiling until the door closed and the apartment returned to silence. Only then did the fatigue rush in. She cleaned the kitchen quickly, grabbed her purse, and locked the door behind her. The walk to the bus stop was short, but the morning air was sharp, and she wrapped her coat tighter around herself. The city was already moving, cars passing, storefronts opening, people heading toward jobs that paid more or demanded less, or both. She tried not to think about that. Comparison was a luxury she couldn't afford. The municipal library where Rachel worked stood near the center of town, a squat brick building that had seen better decades. Inside, the smell of old paper and cleaning solution mixed in a way that had become oddly comforting. She liked the quiet, the order of shelves, the predictability of tasks. Her job title was library assistant, which meant she did a little of everything and nothing that attracted much notice. She checked books in and out, reshelved returns, helped patrons find what they were looking for, and enforced rules that few people respected until reminded. By mid-morning, her feet already ached. She moved steadily through her work, exchanging polite smiles, answering routine questions. Sometimes she caught herself lingering over book covers, imagining what it might be like to have time to read again, not just in fragments before falling asleep. But there was always another cart of returns, another task waiting. During her lunch break, she sat alone at a small table near the staff room window, eating a sandwich she'd made the night before. She checked her phone out of habit, scanning notifications. A reminder about a utility bill due in 3 days. A school email about fundraising. Nothing else. She set the phone down and stared out the window at the parking lot, feeling the familiar sense of being suspended in place. Life wasn't actively getting worse, but it wasn't moving forward either. It was as if she were standing on a treadmill set to a steady pace, walking endlessly without arriving anywhere new. Her shift ended at 3. She clocked out, collected her coat, and headed straight to the grocery store. She moved through the aisles with a list and a calculator in hand, comparing prices, choosing store brands, putting one item back for another. By the time she checked out, she was already running late. She drove home quickly, unloaded the groceries, and left them on the counter to put away later. There was just enough time to check in on the kids before heading out again. Ethan was doing homework at the table, headphones on. Lily sat on the floor surrounded by paper and markers, clearly overwhelmed. Rachel knelt beside her, helped organize the materials, offered reassurance she hoped sounded convincing. She glanced at the clock, apologized, and promised they would work on it more later. Lily nodded, though disappointment flickered across her face before she masked it. Rachel changed into her delivery uniform, grabbed her keys, and was back out the door before 5. The evening hours blurred together as she drove through neighborhoods and commercial districts, picking up packages, dropping them off, following instructions that came through her phone. She navigated traffic, stairs, locked gates, and the occasional irritated customer. She smiled when required, stayed silent when that was easier. Each completed delivery added a small amount to her earnings, numbers that she tracked vaguely without excitement. By the time she returned home, it was close to 10. The apartment was quiet again. The kids were asleep. She put the groceries away, washed a few dishes, and sank onto the edge of the couch. Her legs throbbed. Her head felt heavy. Tomorrow would be the same, and the day after that, and the one after that. She didn't think about long-term plans anymore. Thinking that far ahead felt indulgent, almost reckless. As she prepared for bed, she noticed the stack of mail on the kitchen counter. She sorted through it mechanically. Flyers, a credit card offer, a school notice. Then an envelope that looked different from the rest. Thicker paper. A formal return address. A law firm she didn't recognize. Rachel frowned, turning it over in her hands. She felt a faint, irrational flicker of unease. She opened it slowly and began to read, standing there under the kitchen light, still in her delivery jacket. The letter informed her that she was the sole heir to a property owned by a distant relative, a woman whose name meant nothing to her. The property was located in another town, described briefly and clinically, and appraised at a nominal value of $50. Rachel read the letter twice, then a third time. $50. A property. A relative she had never heard of. The words felt unreal, disconnected from the life she was living. She set the letter down beside the bills and stared at it, unsure whether to laugh or sigh. Her first instinct was to dismiss it as a mistake or an inconvenience she didn't have time to deal with. She turned off the kitchen light and went to bed, the letter still on the counter, waiting. She didn't know it yet, but that piece of paper marked the end of a long stretch of survival and the quiet beginning of something she could not yet imagine. The letter stayed on Rachel Morgan's kitchen counter for 3 days, partially hidden beneath grocery receipts and a folded school newsletter. Each time she passed it, she felt a small tightening in her chest, the kind that came when something unresolved hovered at the edge of her awareness. She told herself it was nothing, an administrative error, a nuisance that would eventually require a phone call she didn't have time to make. Life continued to demand her full attention, leaving little room for curiosity. Yet at night, when the apartment finally grew quiet and the children slept, her thoughts returned to it. A property? A distant relative? $50? The number itself felt almost insulting, as if someone had gone out of their way to quantify the worthlessness of whatever was being offered. Rachel had spent years learning to ignore distractions that didn't help her survive. Hope, she had learned, could be dangerous when it came without substance. On the 4th morning, after another early alarm and another rushed breakfast, she folded the letter and slipped it into her purse. The decision felt impulsive, uncharacteristic. She didn't know why she did it, only that the act of leaving it behind felt wrong. At work, during her lunch break, she finally called the number listed at the bottom of the page. The attorney she spoke with sounded professional and detached, clearly accustomed to conversations like this. He explained the situation again, confirming that the property was real, the valuation accurate, and her connection to the deceased distant but legally sound. He emphasized that she was under no obligation to accept the inheritance. In fact, he said, most people declined when faced with similar circumstances. The building was in poor condition, located in a declining industrial town, and would likely be more trouble than it was worth. Rachel listened quietly, staring at the scuffed surface of the break room table. She felt no excitement, only a vague sense of irritation mixed with an unexpected pull she couldn't name. She thanked him, said she would think about it, and ended the call. For the rest of the day, she moved through her tasks with the same steady efficiency. But her mind kept circling back to one detail the attorney had mentioned almost casually. The property had been kept, maintained at least minimally, for decades after it stopped being used. That detail lingered. The following week brought its usual pressures. Lily's science project deadline loomed. Ethan needed money for a school trip. A warning notice appeared on the electricity bill. Rachel adjusted, rearranged, made do. But the thought of the building refused to fade. She found herself wondering who this woman had been. Why she had held on to a decaying structure long after it ceased to serve a practical purpose. On a Thursday evening, exhausted after her delivery shift, Rachel sat at the small kitchen table with her purse open beside her. The letter lay unfolded in front of her. She reread it slowly, then pulled out her phone and searched for the town listed in the address. The images that appeared were bleak. Empty streets, closed factories, buildings overtaken by time and neglect. It looked like a place the world had moved past and forgotten. She should have closed the browser then. Instead, she checked the distance. Just under 3 hours by car. The next morning, she did something she hadn't done in years. She requested a day off from her library job. The supervisor sounded surprised but approved it without much discussion. Rachel didn't explain. She wasn't sure she could articulate the reason herself. She arranged for the children to stay with a neighbor after school and packed a small bag with water, snacks, and a flashlight she found in a kitchen drawer. She told herself she was simply satisfying her curiosity, closing a loose end. Nothing more. The drive took her out of familiar territory and into long stretches of road lined with bare trees and aging farmhouses. The radio played softly, but she barely noticed it. Her thoughts drifted between practical concerns and vague memories of stories her mother had once told about distant relatives whose names were never explained. Rachel realized how little she actually knew about her own family history. Survival had a way of narrowing focus until the past felt irrelevant. When she reached the town, the sense of abandonment was immediate. Buildings stood empty, their windows dark. Storefront signs faded under layers of dust. The streets were quiet in a way that felt unnatural, as if sound itself had learned to avoid the place. She followed the directions carefully, turning onto a cracked road that led toward the outskirts of town. The building appeared suddenly, looming behind a rusted fence. Rachel parked the car and sat for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel. The structure was worse than she had imagined. Brick walls were stained and fractured. Portions of the roof sagged visibly. Vines crept up the sides, reclaiming the surface inch by inch. Windows were broken or boarded, leaving dark openings that seemed to watch her approach. She stepped out of the car and felt a wave of doubt wash over her. This was ridiculous. She had driven hours to see something that clearly had no value. She should turn around and go home. But she didn't. She walked toward the building instead, her footsteps crunching over gravel and debris. The main entrance was partially collapsed, the door hanging crookedly from its frame. Rachel circled the structure cautiously, keeping her distance where the walls looked unstable. The air smelled of damp earth and decay. It was easy to imagine the place as a hazard, a liability, something to be avoided rather than explored. Along one side, she noticed a smaller metal door, rusted but intact. A heavy lock held it shut. She hesitated, then retrieved the key the attorney had mailed to her earlier that week, almost as an afterthought. It slid into the lock with surprising ease. The door creaked loudly as she pulled it open, the sound echoing into the interior. Inside, the temperature dropped. Dust hung in the air, illuminated by the narrow beam of her flashlight. The space appeared to have once been a workshop of some kind. Long tables stood abandoned, their surfaces scarred and worn. Machinery sat silent, coated in grime. The floor was littered with broken glass and fallen plaster. Rachel moved slowly, testing each step. The building groaned softly around her, settling under its own weight. She felt small and out of place, an intruder in a space that had belonged to another life entirely. The farther she went, the more she sensed the presence of work left unfinished, of effort abandoned rather than erased. Near the back of the ground floor, she noticed something different. A door that looked newer than the rest, reinforced, its edges sealed tightly. Unlike the others, it showed no signs of rot or collapse. Her pulse quickened as she approached it. She tried the handle. Locked. She took out the keys again and tried them one by one. The second key fit. The lock turned smoothly, releasing with a soft click that sounded impossibly loud in the stillness. The air inside the room was dry and cool, untouched by the decay elsewhere in the building. Shelving units lined the walls, sturdy and orderly. On them sat wooden crates and objects carefully wrapped in canvas. Everything was coated in dust, but nothing appeared damaged. Rachel stepped inside slowly, overwhelmed by the contrast. This room had been protected, preserved. Whatever was here had mattered deeply to someone. She pulled back the edge of a canvas covering the nearest crate. Beneath it lay objects crafted with extraordinary care. Wooden panels carved with intricate designs. Metal fixtures shaped with precision. Pieces that felt deliberate, thoughtful, far removed from the utilitarian neglect of the rest of the building. She found notebooks stacked neatly in one corner, their pages filled with handwritten notes and sketches, dates, measurements, reflections. The name Evelyn Hart appeared again and again, signed with a steady hand. Rachel sat down on the floor, her flashlight beside her, and opened one of the notebooks. As she read, she began to understand that this inheritance was not worthless at all. It was simply unseen. And as the afternoon light faded outside the sealed room, she felt the first quiet shift in her understanding, a sense that this forgotten place held something far more significant than $50, something that was waiting to be understood. Rachel did not sleep well that night. The image of the sealed room followed her home, lingering in her thoughts long after she had locked the apartment door behind her and checked on the children. Even as exhaustion pulled at her, her mind refused to settle. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw shelves lined with crates, canvas pulled tight around objects that had been protected, while everything else had been allowed to fall apart. It felt less like an accident and more like intention. The next morning arrived too quickly. Rachel moved through her routine on autopilot, preparing breakfast, packing lunches, ushering Ethan and Lily out the door. But something had shifted. The familiar weight was still there, the responsibilities unchanged, yet beneath it stirred a quiet sense of urgency. She was carrying something now, not in her hands, but in her awareness. A question that would not let her go. At work, she struggled to focus. Books passed through her hands without registering. She reshelved returns mechanically, her thoughts drifting back to Evelyn Hart's notebooks, to the careful handwriting, the sketches that revealed patience and skill. During her lunch break, instead of eating immediately, Rachel pulled out her phone and scrolled through the photographs she had taken. Close-ups of carvings, notes filled with measurements and revisions, dates spanning decades. This was not a hobby. This was a life's work. She finished her shift and drove straight to a small antique shop she had passed many times, but never entered. The storefront was narrow, squeezed between a laundromat and a closed bakery. Inside, the air smelled of old wood and furniture polish. The owner, a man in his late 50s with wire-rimmed glasses, greeted her politely and watched with interest as she unwrapped a small wooden panel she had carefully brought with her from the building. His expression changed almost immediately. He handled the piece gently, turning it under the light, examining the joinery and surface details. He asked where she had found it, how many more pieces there were, whether she had documentation. Rachel answered as best she could, feeling both nervous and strangely protective. When she showed him photographs of the sealed room and the notebooks, his interest sharpened into something closer to excitement. He told her the work was exceptional, not decorative in a mass-produced sense, but crafted, intentional, the kind of work that came from training, not imitation. He admitted that his expertise had limits and suggested she contact specialists, people who studied design history and American craft movements. He wrote down a few names and handed her his card, cautioning her to keep the location of the collection private until she understood what she was dealing with. Rachel drove home in a daze. The city lights blurred past her windshield as she replayed the conversation again and again. Exceptional. Specialists. The words felt unreal, disconnected from the life she knew. That night, after the children were asleep, she sat at the kitchen table and read through Evelyn's notebooks more carefully. The entries revealed frustration and resolve in equal measure. Evelyn wrote about designs rejected for being too expensive, too intricate, too slow to produce. She wrote about selling concepts outright to firms that promised collaboration and delivered anonymity instead. Rachel began to see a pattern. Evelyn's designs appeared again and again in the notebooks alongside references to public buildings, libraries, theaters, civic spaces. Rachel searched online, comparing sketches to photographs of buildings listed in the notes. The resemblance was unmistakable. The work had been used, just not credited. Within a week, Rachel was corresponding with a professor at a nearby university who specialized in mid-century American design. She sent photographs and scans of the notebooks, expecting skepticism. Instead, the response came quickly and with unmistakable interest. The professor confirmed that the work aligned with a lesser-documented branch of the American craft revival, and that Evelyn Hart's name did not appear in any existing records. Rachel took another day off, this time to meet with the professor in person. She brought as much documentation as she could carry. They spread photographs and papers across a long table in a quiet office filled with books and models. As the professor examined the materials, her questions became more detailed. Training, influences, provenance. Rachel answered honestly, admitting how little she knew. The assessment that followed was careful but decisive. The collection was not only valuable, but historically important. Evelyn Hart had contributed to architectural design in ways that had gone unrecognized, her work absorbed into projects attributed to others. The notebooks provided rare evidence of that process, documenting how her ideas were sold, altered, and implemented without acknowledgement. Rachel felt a tightness in her chest as the implications settled in. This wasn't just about money, it was about erasure. About a woman whose work had shaped public spaces while her name disappeared entirely. When the professor discussed potential valuation, Rachel almost stopped listening. The numbers were unreal, far beyond anything she had ever imagined. Enough to pay off debts, secure housing, ensure her children's future. Enough to end the constant anxiety that had defined her adult life. That night, Rachel sat with Ethan and Lily at the kitchen table, helping with homework. She watched their faces, the ease with which they trusted her to hold everything together. The thought of selling the collection outright and walking away was tempting. It would solve so many problems. But as she looked at Evelyn's notebooks again, she felt a growing resistance to that idea. Over the next several weeks, Rachel learned more than she ever expected to know about authentication, appraisal, and historical attribution. She spoke with museum curators, conservators, and legal advisors. Each conversation added clarity and weight. The collection's value increased with every confirmation of its significance. At the same time, something else changed. Rachel began coming home earlier some nights, cutting back slightly on delivery shifts. She cooked dinner instead of reheating leftovers. She listened more, laughed more. Ethan noticed. Lily noticed. The story of Evelyn Hart became a quiet presence in their home, a reminder that work done with care mattered, even if recognition came late. Rachel found herself facing a choice she had never imagined having. She could prioritize immediate financial relief, or she could commit to restoring Evelyn Hart's name and place in history. The conflict was not simple. It touched every part of her life, her responsibilities, her hopes for her children. But as the weeks passed, her resolve grew clearer. Evelyn Hart had been invisible. Rachel had been invisible too, in her own way. But now she had the chance to change that, not only for herself, but for someone whose work had shaped the world quietly and patiently. By the time Rachel stood again in the sealed room, now catalogued and carefully documented, she understood that the inheritance had never been about the building or the money. It was about responsibility, about what she chose to do with what had been entrusted to her. And as she closed the door behind her, she knew that the next step would change not just her life, but the story of Evelyn Hart forever. By the time Rachel Morgan made her final decision, winter had begun to loosen its grip on the city. The days were still cold, but the light lingered a little longer in the evenings, and that subtle change felt symbolic. Something was shifting, not just in the season, but in her life. The weeks following her conversations with historians, curators, and legal advisors had been filled with a kind of focused intensity she had never experienced before. Every choice carried weight. Every document she signed felt like a step across unfamiliar ground. The sealed room in the old industrial building had become a place of careful activity. Under professional supervision, each piece of Evelyn Hart's work was catalogued, photographed, measured, and condition-checked. Conservators handled the objects with reverence, discussing techniques and design decisions with an excitement that still surprised Rachel. Hearing Evelyn's name spoken with respect, spoken often and seriously, felt like witnessing a wrong being quietly corrected. Offers began to arrive. Auction houses expressed interest, their estimates climbing with each new layer of documentation. Private collectors made discreet inquiries. Financial projections were laid out clearly, professionally, numbers that could have erased every fear Rachel had lived with for years. She studied them carefully, weighing them against the reality of her responsibilities. Ethan's future education, Lily's growing curiosity and need for stability, her own exhaustion, accumulated over decades of constant effort. At night, after the children were asleep, Rachel reread Evelyn's notebooks. One entry in particular stayed with her. Evelyn had written about the hope that someone, someday, might understand what she was trying to do. Not just to make objects, but to leave evidence of intention. To prove that her work existed, that she had existed. That hope reached across time and settled heavily on Rachel's shoulders. The decision, when it came, felt both terrifying and inevitable. Rachel chose to partner with a consortium of regional museums and academic institutions. The agreement guaranteed financial security beyond anything she had ever known, though less than what a full auction might have yielded. In return, the collection would be exhibited publicly, studied, written about, and permanently integrated into the historical record. Evelyn Hart's name would appear where it had long been absent. Once the contracts were signed, the pace accelerated. Exhibition plans took shape. Titles were debated. Essays were commissioned. Rachel was asked to participate in interviews, to speak not as a scholar, but as a witness to discovery. At first, the idea unsettled her. She had spent most of her adult life trying not to be noticed. Now she was being asked to stand at the center of a story. Her life adjusted in practical ways as well. She reduced her working hours, then left the delivery job entirely. The loss of constant urgency felt strange, almost disorienting. Evenings opened up. She cooked meals without watching the clock. She sat with Ethan as he worked through difficult assignments, listened as Lily explained her ideas with growing confidence. The children sensed the change, responding to it with relief and curiosity. Ethan, in particular, was affected by the unfolding story. He spent hours reading about architecture, about design, and how public spaces were shaped. He asked questions Rachel couldn't always answer, and together they looked for explanations. Lily began sketching more often, filling notebooks with imaginative designs inspired by photographs of Evelyn's work. Rachel watched them both and felt something inside her ease. The inheritance had become a source of connection rather than anxiety. The exhibition opened in early autumn. The museum's main gallery was transformed by Evelyn Hart's work. Pieces that had sat unseen for decades now stood under careful lighting, their details revealed and celebrated. Visitors moved slowly through the space, reading descriptions, studying craftsmanship, pausing in quiet attention. Rachel stood at the edge of the room, observing, overwhelmed by the sight of strangers engaging deeply with something that had once been hidden. During the opening remarks, the lead curator spoke about rediscovery, about how history was shaped as much by omission as by recognition. Evelyn Hart's name was spoken clearly, repeatedly, placed firmly within a lineage she had been denied in life. Rachel listened, her hands trembling slightly, and felt a profound sense of completion. As the exhibition traveled to other cities, the story spread. Academic articles were published, historical records were amended, plaques were installed in buildings where Evelyn's designs had long existed without credit. Her work was no longer anonymous, it belonged to her again. Rachel's role evolved alongside the exhibition. She spoke at openings, participated in panel discussions, answered questions from students and journalists. Each time, she spoke not about money or luck, but about labor, persistence, and the quiet dignity of work done without recognition. Her voice grew steadier with each appearance, her confidence rooted not in performance, but in purpose. At home, life found a new rhythm. Rachel moved to a larger apartment filled with light, a space where the children could grow without constraint. She enrolled in courses at a local college, studying design history and architecture, driven not by necessity, but by genuine interest. Sitting in classrooms among younger students felt strange at first, but invigorating. Learning, she discovered, was a form of reclaiming time. The money, carefully managed, removed fear from her daily decisions. Bills no longer dictated her thoughts. Sleep came more easily. But what mattered most was the shift in how she saw herself. She was no longer simply enduring. She was choosing. One evening, months after the exhibition's opening, Rachel sat at her desk, writing in a notebook of her own. She reflected on the strange symmetry of it all. A woman who had worked in obscurity, leaving behind proof of her existence. Another woman, worn down by responsibility, finding that proof and being changed by it. Neither story was simple. Neither fit neatly into the idea of sudden fortune. Rachel understood now that the inheritance had never been about escape. It had been an invitation to see value where the world had overlooked it, to insist on recognition not just for Evelyn Hart, but for all the unseen labor that sustained lives quietly. As the evening light faded through the window, Rachel closed her notebook and looked around her workspace. Sketches lined the walls. Books were stacked within reach. Photographs of Evelyn's work sat beside drawings by her children. The past and future existed together there, no longer separate. The building that had once seemed worthless was now empty, its contents dispersed, its purpose fulfilled. What remained was not a structure, but a legacy restored and a life redirected. Rachel felt gratitude, not for the money, but for the chance to stop merely surviving and begin shaping something meaningful. The letter that had once felt like an inconvenience had become the turning point she never knew she needed. And as she prepared for the next day, not with dread, but with intention, Rachel Morgan understood that some inheritances did not measure their worth in dollars at all, but in the lives they made possible afterward. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what comes next. More stories like this are on the way, and the next one may surprise you just as much. Be sure to check out the other videos on the channel for more powerful human stories, and if this video moved you, share it with someone who might need to hear it today. Your support helps these stories reach the people they're meant for.